Welcome back to the BookEnds YouTube channel. I'm James McGowan.
Hi, I'm Jessica Faust.
We are literary agents who have taken our popular blog to YouTube to discuss all things publishing. And today we are talking about the dreaded sample pages, or what some people might call first pages.
Are they really dreaded? I didn't know
I
that.
feel like a lot of authors really fret about them. So that's kind of the reason why I want to do this video, because there's a lot of focus on making those first pages perfect, right?
I think there's a misconception about how they're used, and I think it would be it's very valuable, which we're going to go into, about how agents view these sample pages and use them.
Yeah, so first, most obviously, if you don't know what the sample pages are, when you're querying, some, if not all, most, whatever, agents will ask for a set of sample pages when you send your query along. That can range, really, depending on the agent or the agency, could range from anywhere from 5 pages to 10 pages. I've seen some people ask for 25 or 50 pages. So it could really range on what those first pages are considered. But they are basically sent along with your query letter to give the agent a sense of what the project is like beyond the query. So when does an agent even read those?
This is fun.
It is.
I mean, let me start and tell you how I read them.
Yeah.
So we've had this discussion at BookEnds. We have sort of an idea of how we read or who reads what. I do request sample pages with every query. I request, I think it's about 5 sample pages is my request. And I would say most of the time I do not read them. So for me, the sample pages are, I read the query and I make a decision. Either I want to read the book and I request it, or it didn't grab my attention, I'm not that interested, and reject it. When I'm on the fence, maybe the writing in the query was really good, but the idea felt blah, or maybe there was something in the idea, but it really needs to be great writing to work for me, then I will read the sample pages. But I would say those come into play, I don't know, maybe 5% of the time. Like, I do not read most sample pages. Yeah. And then for me, and then I would say once I read the sample pages, my request rate based on sample pages might be close to 50%. About 50% of those I read the sample pages of will be a pass, and about 50% will be a request.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Sample pages for me are a tiebreaker. I know some agents, I have a couple friends that read them all the time. I'm never really, when I'm reading queries, I'm never in a submission reading mode. So if I request something that day, I come back at a later time when I'm like, all right, I'm going to read submissions today, where my head is in the game for submissions. And that's when I read the submissions. So if I'm reading your queries and I go to your sample page, I don't usually do it, is what I'm saying. So if I'm on the fence, I hit maybe, and then I come back and in another mindset, I will read the query again with the sample pages, and that's how I decide. So the sample pages are very much a tiebreaker, but they're also like next step, right? Like for me, if I like those sample pages, I want to request and read it. So I don't really consider it as part of my query tool bag, but more like, okay, I need to decide if I want to read this, and they're the tiebreaker.
You know, as you were saying that, I was really thinking back in the days of snail mail only submissions, we would never request a full manuscript without having read the proposal first. And times were different. You know, everything was coming snail mail. It was costing people more money, and it was taking up more office space.
A lot of money.
So I didn't want to request a full manuscript if I was going to only read 3 pages or 20 pages. So I would request the proposal first. If I finished the proposal and really liked it, I would send another snail mail letter back to the author and request the full manuscript. And I think for many agents, the sample pages have taken the place of that proposal step, where most agents don't request proposals anymore. They go straight to the full manuscript. But if they're unsure, they'll read those sample pages in the same way we would request the proposal to test how sure we were.
It's kind of like your gut check, like, not sure this is for me, read the sample pages, not for me, or not sure this is for me, read the sample pages, oh, maybe it is. And then before we have to commit to reading the full manuscript, right? Because when we request that, we do feel that sense of, all right, I have to read this, and when I respond, it's got to be clear that I read it. So that's how I look at them.
maybe you're a little more committed than me. I don't have to read the full manuscript.
No,
if
no,
I'm
no,
requested.
no.
I read what I can, but I also, yes, I need to know that I'm going to read at least some of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to request something that I don't want to read. So
Yeah, and you said something that had me thinking. You said that some agents read the sample pages every time. And I want to talk a little bit about why I don't. My job at the very beginning stages is really sales. And I need to sell your book, and it needs to sell right off the bat, not just to editors, not just to agents, but to readers too. So if your query doesn't stand out to me as saleable and different and marketable, then the sample pages could be great. The book could be great, but it doesn't have anything special that's going to help readers to discover why the sample pages in the book were great, because nobody's going to bother to pick it up if it doesn't sound different from everything else. So that is why I feel I can make a judgment call on the query alone, because as readers, we are making judgment calls on the book's packaging alone. We're not reading, when we're going to the bookstore, we're not reading sample pages before we buy every book.
yeah, that was well put.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're in the mindset, right? We're reading sample pages. What are we looking for? What do sample pages tell an agent? I guess I went with it. I think there are a few things that we're looking for, and I know it might seem like, oh, it's 5 pages. How do you get a sense of my book? But there's a lot within those 5 pages that we can sort of feather out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like your writing style and your tone immediately are evident because it's your words, it's your book, it's your writing. So within those 5 pages, we're getting a sense of, do I gel with this? Can I dive into a book of all these 5 pages, right?
But also, does it fit the tone of the market?
Right.
So I find that I read sample pages more in literary or upmarket fiction. And I might read them because I'm questioning whether it's really going to work in that area. And if it's not at the level it needs to be, then it's not working for me.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, it's all very subjective, but even in that space, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
Because that whole spectrum of commercial, upmarket, literary, it's different for every reader. So especially there, I would say. But it's also helpful in picture books too, because usually your 5 pages are your full manuscript. So we're getting a full sense of your book. Just want to throw that out there. But another thing that it's telling us, and I think is important, more important than people think, is where the manuscript starts, particularly for a longer work. Where your book is starting is very important. Are you hooking your reader in immediately? Because that's what you need to be doing. Or are you burying us in world building? Are you, burying us in exposition? Where it starts will tell me where it's in some metric where it's going.
Yeah, I think there are 2 mistakes I see in sample pages frequently. One is the prologue. I do not think it's the best use of your sample pages, which probably should be talked in the next section, but I think it's important here, should be your prologue. Because I don't think the prologue really tells anybody enough about the actual book. It is what it is. It's a prologue. So even if you have a prologue, I would suggest not using those as your sample pages.
But also it's something to consider, right? Like if you have a prologue and it's not an accurate example of your book, then why is it in there? So just something to consider. Something to consider.
The other thing about where the manuscript starts, the other mistake that I frequently feel we see is a ton of backstory.
Yeah.
It's overloaded with backstory, which nobody wants to read in your book. So therefore nobody wants to read your sample pages. And I think it's an interesting exercise for authors to pull out those 5 to 10 to 15 pages, first pages of your book and say, would I want to give these to somebody as my sample pages? Because if you don't, then is that really the introduction you want your readers to have to your book?
Yeah, because and this is kind of what I was touching on in the beginning. Everybody really, really polishes those first few pages, right? Because that's what they think. An agent's going to read these, they have to be great. But you know how many times we read those first 10, 15 pages and then the book falls off? Like it has to be uniform with the rest of your book.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that's kind of why I wanted to do this video, because there's so much focus on it, and I kind of want to dispel all of the anxiety about those first pages, because really, if you're producing a strong book in line with all of the advice we've given on the channel, then those first 10, 15 pages, they just work. You don't have to stress about them.
It's interesting because this does go back to the discussion about old school submissions, snail mail submissions, and proposals. And I used to talk a lot at panels in those days about how the proposals were workshopped to death. They were polished, they were beautiful. I was so excited. And I'd get the rest of the manuscript and it was like, oh, so they workshopped the proposal 15 times and then they only did the manuscript twice.
But to
and
me,
you
that's
could see
sad.
it.
That's sad because it's like, okay, so this is what you can be, and this is where you kind of just decided to phone it in.
You settled.
Yeah, you did. Anyway. So the last thing that I think the first sample pages give us, and this is more broad, I don't really think we can get very specific, is just any potential problems. Like characterization problems, we can see theme, message, all of it. Like we can
Sometimes even plot.
Yeah, we can, and that goes back to where it starts, really. Like if it's not starting in the right place, it may not go in the right place. And really it's like that trial run of the book. Do we want to get into this? I think that's something that is harder to pin down, but really could tell an agent, especially in terms of what they're looking for in their own subjective lists.
Absolutely.
So I kind of just said this as well, but how can you make the best sample pages that you can make? It's focusing on just making the best book that you can make. I think if you're polishing and editing your book and you are doing what Jessica said and looking at those first sample pages separate and how they might relate to the rest of the book and just making sure it's uniform and your best work, I think by default you'll have the strongest sample pages for your book.
Yeah, they shouldn't be any better than the rest of the manuscript. The rest of the manuscript should be as good as your sample pages. In fact, maybe we should take out the word sample and use first pages.
Yeah, it's like don't stress. Like I feel like it's that one thing we feel we have to stress about and focus on. Yeah. But it's not forest for the trees, you know?
Yeah.
That's my
I hear you.
All right. So we hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time.
Bye.